You're watching All 24 News World News Program, and up next are tonight's top stories. Cold and blockading Gaza Strip. 7 die as bitter storm hits. Civil defense warns of tougher days ahead and urges global action. Hamas says the Strip is still facing devastation from the storm and siege. Sudan rocked by violence. The RSF attacked Sennar, causing casualties. The army says it killed and wounded hundreds of RSF fighters in several areas. The UN warns fighting is crippling healthcare and worsening displacement in the region. Also on news tonight, Iran vows to protect its independence and territory. EU warns of new sanctions while Trump threatens 25% tariffs on nations trading with Tehran. And later on in Ukraine, Russian attacks on Kharkiv and Donetsk leave casualties. Washington condemns the use of Orishnik missiles, while Germany calls on NATO to secure lasting peace. Welcome back. First off in our news tonight, 6 Palestinians, including children, have died as extreme cold grips the Gaza Strip. The health ministry in Gaza says 3 children died from exposure after freezing temperatures hit 10 shelter and displaced families, including in Deir al-Balah. That brings the number of children who have died from the cold this winter to 7. Civil defense teams also report 3 more deaths in Gaza City after rain and strong winds caused partially destroyed buildings to collapse amid the severe weather.
At night the wind blew towards us around 1 a.m. We kept holding on until the tent collapsed on us. We carried the young children out. I had 7 people with me. 7. We carried them out and went to the neighbors.
Civil defense spokesman Mahmoud Basil says thousands of buildings in Gaza could collapse after earlier Zionist bombardment. Speaking Tuesday, he warned the situation is critical with more deaths and collapses expected as the storm continues. Many shelters, he said, are now unsafe. Basil added that civil defense teams cannot cope with the extreme cold, stressing the need for an international response to the crisis. Hamas says Gaza is facing what it describes as the worst forms of genocide, with deaths rising from the cold, alongside siege conditions, collapsing bombed buildings, and the spread of disease. Spokesman Hazem Qasem said the international community has failed to provide relief despite repeated calls to lift the Zionist siege. He urged urgent action to support Palestinians and to stop the right-wing Zionist government from continuing its campaign in Gaza.
The continued deaths of children and the elderly due to the cold, the collapse of shelled and destroyed homes, and the spread of diseases confirm that the Gaza Strip is still living through the most brutal forms of extermination under the cold and the blockade. It is unfortunate that the entire international system remains incapable of providing relief to our people in Gaza, despite repeated appeals with the ongoing Israeli-imposed blockade on the Gaza Strip. We call on the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the international community to take urgent action to aid Gaza and break the Israeli blockade.
Gaza's health ministry says 5 Palestinians were killed and 6 others injured over the past 24 hours. In its daily update, the ministry reported that a child died from extreme cold, bringing the winter toll among children to 7. It also said 3 Palestinians were killed in a building collapse, raising the total number of deaths from collapses to 24. The United Nations says at least 100 Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza since the ceasefire began. Speaking in Geneva, UNICEF spokesperson James Elder said the deaths have continued almost daily since early October, despite the truce. He added that children were killed in airstrikes, drone attacks, tank shelling, and live fire ammunition.
More than 100 children have been killed in Gaza since the ceasefire of early October. That is roughly one girl or boy killed every day during a ceasefire. Life in Gaza remains suffocating. Survival is still conditional. Whilst the bombings and shooting have slowed during the ceasefire, they have not stopped.
The United Nations says acute malnutrition in Gaza has climbed to around 95,000 cases, warning that the humanitarian situation remains critical amid harsh weather. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said aid partners screened more than 76 children last month, identifying nearly 4,900 cases of acute malnutrition.
Meanwhile, our partners leading on addressing malnutrition report that last month they screened 76,000 children and identified about 4,900 cases of acute malnutrition, including more than 820 cases of severe acute malnutrition. This brings the total number of acute malnutrition cases identified in 2025 to nearly 95,000.
Qatar's foreign ministry says the complexity of ongoing talks requires moving forward to the second phase of the Gaza agreement. Spokesman Majid al-Ansari said the Israeli occupation must explain the delay, particularly as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues. He added that Qatar is working with mediators to push the agreement into its next phase.
Frankly, it's a miracle that we have gotten to this point. We only have one body left to hand over. As we have always said, the logistical situation in Gaza would certainly make it difficult to reach this result, but we have reached this result right now, and I think, as we have stated, that this should never have been, a hamper in front of moving to stage 2, and we think that we are working very closely, of course, and we think that we should be pushing the parties to stage 2 very soon.
In the West Bank, the Quds governorate says the Israeli occupation has started cutting electricity and water to UNRWA buildings in the city. The governorate warned Tuesday that the move targets the agency's presence and could seriously disrupt education, health, and relief services for Palestinian refugees in occupied Al-Quds.
يوم الأحد الماضي تاريخ 12 الشهر شركة
Last Sunday, the 12th of the current month, the electricity, water and telecommunications companies informed 10 UNRWA-affiliated branches that they would cut off these services, including the main headquarters in Sheikh Jarrah. This means a war against this international organization, which was established based on UN Resolution 301. This means ending the Palestinian people's dream of the right to return, ending the term refugees, and ending the educational, health, training and vocational services provided by this agency and these branches to thousands of Palestinian refugees.
Extremists at Ben Gvir, the occupation's so-called national security minister, stormed the Aqsa Mosque compound. The Quds governorate said Wednesday that Ben Gvir entered during settler incursion hours. Alongside him, 194 settlers entered through the Maghariba gate under heavy Zionist guard, performing Talmudic rituals in the mosque courtyards. Moving on to the war in Sudan, at least 27 civilians were killed and many others injured in a drone strike by the Rapid Support Forces in Senja, Sennar State, Eastern Sudan. The Sudanese Doctors Network said Tuesday that an RSF-guided missile hit civilian areas, calling the attack a deliberate crime. The group urged the international community to act against the RSF and hold those responsible accountable. Meanwhile, the Sudanese armed forces say they are targeting Rapid Support Forces positions in Kordofan, Darfur and Blue Nile. In the past 72 hours, they report destroying 56 RSF vehicles in Kordofan and killing or wounding hundreds of fighters in Darfur. In Darfur, 47 vehicles were destroyed with more casualties, while in Blue Nile, 4 vehicles were destroyed and dozens of RSF members were killed or wounded. Several fuel and ammunition depots were also targeted across the regions. The Darfur regional government says negotiations with the rapid support forces are off the table now, leaving only a military solution. Speaking to All24 News TV, Information Minister Ahmed Shanab said the Sudanese armed forces will not consider a political solution unless the RSF disarms, integrates into the army, and those responsible for crimes against civilians are held accountable.
As a Sudanese society, government, and the armed forces, we will not lay down our weapons unless the militia surrenders. We are a state that fights under the banner of the armed forces and the joint forces, alongside all the Sudanese people. We will continue until the militia surrenders or justice is delivered for our people, strengthening, training, and supporting the armed forces, the joint forces, and all volunteers, materially and morally, is the duty of this stage.
The United Nations warns escalating violence in Sudan's South Kordofan state is collapsing health services and facing new waves of displacement. The UN's humanitarian office, OCHA, reports ongoing shelling in the city of Dilling has put 3 major hospitals out of service and killed 4 doctors as well. It says persistent insecurity and siege-like conditions are severely cutting off trapped civilians from life-saving aid. Turning to other news now, the UK government has reaffirmed its full support for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination and independence. Adala organization head Sid Ahmed Al-Yadasi told All24 News TV that despite Morocco presenting UN Security Council Resolution 2797 as a diplomatic win, Britain's position exposes the occupation's propaganda and rejects its unilateral claims.
Despite Morocco's attempts to market the Security Council Decision 2797 as a diplomatic victory, the official British position reveals the exact opposite. Following the letter we sent to the British Foreign Office regarding the Western Sahara issue, we received an official reply from the British Minister of State, in which he clearly confirms that the decision does not represent the end of the conflict, but rather the beginning of a UN political process, and that it does not confer any legitimacy on Morocco's unilateral claims. Most importantly, the British response explicitly reaffirmed the principle of self-determination in accordance with the United Nations Charter without any recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. This undermines the narrative that Morocco is attempting to promote regarding the existence of international support for the autonomy project. This undermines the narrative that Morocco is attempting to promote regarding the existence of international support for the autonomy project. The British government's linkage of any solution for respect for international law confirms that the territory remains listed as a decolonization issue that has not yet been resolved.
South Africa's ruling African National Congress has reaffirmed its steadfast support for the Sahrawi people and their right to self-determination. The party told the Sahrawi press agency that it remains committed to backing liberation movements and human rights, upholding the principles of freedom and justice on which it was founded. A report from Morocco's authority for supporting the nation's causes warns that recent education reforms threaten the country's values and identity. Titled Education for Normalization in Moroccan Curricula 2020 and 2025, it says the reforms aim to turn schools from spaces teaching justice and support from for the oppressed into platforms promoting normalization with the Zionist entity and downplaying its aggression against Palestine.
Moroccan school curricula have gradually sidelined the Palestinian cause. Once present in text, images, and activities, this ideological shift redefines Zionist aggression to support the normalization agenda. Current curricula promote values like tolerance and global citizenship outside the context of justice and human rights, turning them into tools that justify occupation. Following the official normalization after December 2020 agreement, Textbooks now include a positive image of the Zionist entity, betraying identity and shaping the collective consciousness of rising generations.
The report also called the reforms a dangerous retreat from Islamic and national values in favor of normalization narratives, warning that the threat goes beyond removing Palestine from the curriculum to reshaping the values and mindset of the younger generation.
The current curricula go beyond erasing the Palestinian cause, implanting a distorted view of history and portraying the Zionist occupation as a natural political partner. Schools have become tools to promote normalization and redefine patriotism to serve foreign interests, leaving Moroccan education vulnerable to manipulation of values and national identity. Curriculum must be seen as a central front in the battle of awareness and national liberation. Remaining under social oversight, normalization threatens Morocco's sovereignty and identity.
Moving on to another topical development now, an Iranian official told Reuters that nearly 2,000 people have been killed in nationwide protests blaming terrorist groups for civilian and security force deaths. Tasnim news agency quoted Chief of Staff Abdurrahim Mousavi accusing the U.S. and the Zionist entity of sending ISIS operatives to Iran to target civilians and security forces, claiming it is revenge for their defeat in the 12-day war. Iran's intelligence ministry announced the arrest of terrorist cells in Zahedan, in Sistan and Baluchistan, claiming they were backed by the Zionist entity and had entered through the eastern borders. The ministry said the cells planned assassinations and attacks on critical infrastructure. U.S.-made weapons and explosives were seized in 7 hideouts. The Iranian Armed Forces General Staff claims Washington and the Zionist entity have restored to terrorist elements to compensate for what it calls their historic defeat against Iran. In statements Tuesday, Chief of Staff Abdurrahim Mousavi said Iran will not concede any of its independence, territorial integrity, or national interests. He stated that the Iranian armed forces will defend the country with their lives. The Iranian Defense Ministry says all U.S. bases and countries that facilitate Washington's operations in the region will be considered legitimate targets. The Defense Minister Aziz Nasserzadeh stated Tuesday that Tehran will respond forcefully to any aggression and will not allow threats. He added that Iran's defense capabilities are now better than during the last war. Iran's foreign minister has accused Europe of turning a blind eye to crimes in Gaza while condemning recent riots in Iran. In a statement, Foreign Minister Basaragji said over 2 years of genocide in Gaza prompt no real European action against Israeli occupation. He emphasized that in contrast, the European Parliament needed only a few days of violent riots in Iran to move to sanction Iranian diplomats. For its part, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU will soon propose new sanctions against those suppressing protests in Iran. In a tweet on X platform, she condemned the rising death toll, denounced the excessive use of force, and criticized ongoing restrictions on freedoms, pledging that Brussels will act swiftly. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened a 25% tariff on any country doing businesses with Iran. Posting on Truth Social on Monday, he called the move final and irrevocable without giving details. The White House has yet to release official documents or clarify the legal basis or which trading partners would be affected.
Effective immediately, any country doing business with the Islamic Republic of Iran will pay a tariff of 25% on any and all business being done with the United States of America. This order is final and conclusive.
China, for its part, says it will defend its interests after U.S. President Donald Trump announced 25% tariff on any country that trades with Iran. Responding to a question on the announcement, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning stated Tuesday that China believes there are no winners in the tariff war. She added that China will resolutely defend its legitimate rights and is closely monitoring developments regarding Iran.
China's position on the tariffs issue is very clear. Tariff war have no winners. China will firmly safeguard its legitimate and lawful rights and interests.
Similarly, China has rejected what it calls unilateral and illegal sanctions after Trump threatened a 25% tariff on countries trading with Iran. A Chinese embassy spokesperson in Washington said Beijing's opposition is firm and warned it will take all necessary measures to protect its legitimate rights and interests.
China's position against the indiscriminate imposition of tariffs is consistent and clear. Tariff wars and trade wars have no winners, and coercion and pressure cannot solve problems. Protectionism harms the interests of all parties.
Moving on to another global news story. Russian airstrikes on Monday night killed at least 4 and injured 6 near Kharkiv, northeastern Ukraine, the region's governor said. The latter reported the casualties on Telegram, while Kharkiv mayor said a Russian drone hit a children's medical facility, sparking a fire. In Donetsk, Russian shelling killed 2 and wounded others, according to Ukrainian officials. The U.S. condemned Russia's use of an Orshenik hypersonic missile in Ukraine, calling it a dangerous and inexplicable escalation. At the UN Security Council emergency session, Deputy Ambassador Tammy Bruce said the missile struck near the Poland and NATO border, warning it undermines ongoing U.S. efforts with Kiev, Moscow, and partners to negotiate an end to the war. German Foreign Minister Johannes Vodafall said Monday that NATO members must cooperate to ensure security. After meeting U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington, he added that Greenland's future should be decided by Denmark and the island itself, responding to Trump's claim it should join the United States.
With this in mind, we also discussed the security in the Arctic region, and it is absolutely right and indisputable that both Russia and China have discovered the Arctic region for themselves, that climate change is contributing to this, and we must make joint efforts to ensure that our interests in the Arctic region are safeguarded. This is of crucial importance. This is a task for NATO, which we are tackling together within the alliance, and I assume that the alliance will also address these issues in the coming days.
Greenland's future is sparking international attention, with Europe and the United States racing to secure the Arctic island amid reports of a surprise vote to join Russia. More on this story with Sam Burkan in this report.
Tensions over Greenland's future are drawing growing attention from Europe and the United States as nations weigh the island's strategic importance in the Arctic. Poland has joined the conversation, calling for broader international discussions. Officials say Greenland's location is critical amid what they described as rising threats from Russia and increasing economic competition with China.
Of course, if we look at the Greenland issue from a strategic geopolitical perspective and realize the great threat posed by the Russian Federation on the one hand and the economic rivalry from China, we will see that Greenland is a very important strategic location and requires extensive discussion, of course within the framework of partnership, and I think and I very much hope that this will be the end of it.
In response, Denmark is set to hold a high-level meeting at the White House on Wednesday. Danish and Greenlandic officials will meet with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio to coordinate on Arctic security. The talks follow Danish Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen's announcement that he will meet NATO Secretary General to discuss regional defense and security. Meanwhile, Russia has entered the debate with sharp rhetoric Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, told Interfax news agency that Greenland's population could vote to join Russia if the United States does not act quickly. He claimed that a sudden referendum could allow all 55,000 residents to decide in favor of joining Russia. These developments echo past statements by former U.S. President Donald Trump, who stressed that Greenland must remain under U.S. influence to prevent Russia or China from gaining control over the resource-rich Arctic territory.
And that brings us to the end of our news program for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great night.